Hello guys, I'm CBM Productions, and to cap up this special year that is 2020, I decided after my major ranking and ranking all 111 Marvel and DC films back in October, doing immensely well, I'll leave a link to that video down in the description. I thought it'd be fun to rank two of the biggest animation studios of all time, Pixar and DreamWorks, and clash them together in a now 23-year rivalry between both companies, and see which films come out on top. Not to mention that my individual Pixar and DreamWorks rankings I did like a year and a half, 2 years ago are obsolete now and are just kind of bad looking back on it. And I do want to redo them because a lot of my placements on those lists have since changed. And I want to give all you guys an updated ranking of all these movies. Along with the fact that despite 2020 being a very empty year for big films, animation was definitely the genre that kind of dominated this year, considering that these movies could be made at home and not requiring all these big sets or actors having to show up. And we did get our 4 slated Pixar and DreamWorks films this year, from Onward to Croods 2, The Trolls World Tour, and most recently Pixar Soul, which as the time of recording just dropped into Disney Plus a couple days ago. Before we get into the ranking, I do want to say a couple things first. Firstly, most importantly, that this is a very subjective list. This list is not meant to be the end-all be-all for all of these movies, and I am going to warn you beforehand, there are a couple of hot takes on this list, and rather than just spreading vitriol in the comments, let's just have a discussion about it and just list your ranking. And also don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Videos like these do take days to make. Audience engagement is the key for these videos to be spread around and actually find an audience, and it would truly mean the world for me if you guys did that. But enough with the setup. Let's get ready for the Clash of the Cartoons. All 23 Pixar films and all 40 DreamWorks films. Let's see who comes out on top. Coming in last place, number 63, the bottom of the barrel, the very worst film of this entire list, in my opinion, is Shrek the Third. Shrek the Third is a sequel that most people agree that is just a bad sequel. It's easily the worst of the 4 main Shrek films that we've gotten. It's a very lazy attempt to try to cash on the success of the first 2 movies. The story just doesn't really seem that exciting or noteworthy to make a sequel off of, other than, I guess, they want to market Shrek babies, I guess. The humor in this film just falls very flat, and apart from some of the side characters having their own little gags going on, a lot of the jokes just do not work. I didn't find Prince Charming nearly as charming, no pun intended, as he was in the previous film. I just didn't find the main characters having that much enthusiasm or just didn't really care for them that much. It has a really weird tone to it, where it starts out with the king dying and then it just immediately goes into barf jokes. It just, for me, it just doesn't work. There are a couple of gags that do work from the previous movies, such as some of the side characters still having their charm to them. It's still not terrible. Like, even the very bottom of this list is nowhere near the worst I got into my Marvel and DC videos. This is no Fan4stick, this is no Catwoman, but this is just a bad sequel. And it's just a cash grab, it's lazy, I didn't really care for it, it's not really memorable to me. It is what it is, and it's at the bottom of this list for a reason. Coming in at number 62 for me is going to be Cars 2. The very worst Pixar film ever made for me. Similar to Shrek the Third, it's a bad sequel. This is a movie that no one wanted. Out of all the sequels that Pixar could have made and they eventually got to, the fact that they made a Cars sequel was just very off. The first one did extremely well. I understand because it's a very bankable franchise to, cash in on, but this film is just bad. It does not have the Pixar staple that most of these movies do have. Even the weaker, original Pixar films, they have certain feels and they have a certain effort in them. This just feels like a direct-to-video sequel that somehow got a theatrical release. The decision to make Mater the main character was just a bad idea. I do like Mater in small segments, like I liked him in the first Cars movie, and eventually when they Jar Jar Binksed him in Cars 3, even he has a couple of good lines here and there. He's not a terrible character, it's just, with these spin-off movies, they're very risky because it really depends on how substantial the character really is, or if they're just jokes, and Mater is just jokes throughout the entire movie. It has a very weird pace to it, where it has a spy thriller James Bond-esque to it. I never understood why they went in that direction, and the fact that looking back on it, it's basically the Last Jedi of the Cars trilogy. And I'm someone who likes The Last Jedi. No hate from me in the comments, please, Star Wars fans. But when you look back on it, it's just such a weird movie. The comedy doesn't work, the tone is very off and all over the place, the villain's very forgettable, generic twist stuff. I didn't care for Lightning McQueen's storyline with the Italian racer car. There are some cool imagery. Again, Pixar, great, animation as always. I do like the aspect of this going global, and you get a lot of pretty locations. And it's not unbearable. Like, if I was forced to watch this while babysitting kids or something like that, I wouldn't hate myself. It's just very low brow. It's just not Pixar standards. And for me, it is the worst Pixar film because it just doesn't have that soul. No pun intended. It just doesn't have that passion that most Pixar films do, and it just feels like just some off project that somehow got theatrical release, and that's Cars 2 for you. Number 61 for me is gonna be Shark Tale. Back in the days where DreamWorks were very much ripping off Pixar movies, this is definitely a poor man's Finding Nemo, and in all the worst ways. This is a bad movie. I remember growing up with this movie and not thinking it was that bad. I remember enjoying the scenery. It's still very well animated. I still do love the Ocean City look to it that it has, and it has some of that nostalgia that still retains to me, but rewatching it a couple years ago for my Dreamers ranking, it is a bad movie. It is just not well done. The humor just doesn't fall flat. I did not care for any of the characters. Will Smith, as I believe his name's Oscar the Fish, he's just a douchebag through the entire movie. It's the generic guy who wants to become famous. He doesn't really, appreciate those around him that actually care for him. This really weird love triangle that he has between this very beautiful fish and then you have like, the girl next door type fish. Jack Black, before he, redeemed himself in the Kung Fu Panda series, he's this very annoying shark that I could not stand through the entire movie. His brother dies and all of a sudden they have to lie to everyone that like he's a shark slayer. And then, all the twists and turns that you expect for this movie, it goes that way. The humor doesn't work. Like, it is extremely outdated. This is by far the most outdated film in this entire list. It screams 2004 and it does not escape that. It doesn't have the nostalgia of something like the 80s have. You kind of cringe looking back on it because it's all about him being a rap star, Will Smith at least, when he was actually rapping. The song choices are very early 2000s. The jokes are very early 2000s. You got Martin Scorsese as a pufferfish. Like, what? It's just a bad movie. I don't enjoy it. I didn't care for the characters. I didn't care for any of the emotions. There's a couple jokes that do work for me, but for the most part, this is just a bad movie and I don't recommend it. Coming in number 60, Kova's messed with a lot of things, but will not mess with our parade floats.
Hello, Boss Baby.
The Boss Baby. Now here's where we start getting to the very mediocre films in my opinion. I really only consider the bottom 3 of this list to be actual bad movies. The rest of this list is actually either range from mediocre to decent to good to great to amazing to some of my favorite films of all time. When you get to Boss Baby, it's exactly what you expect. It's a very low-brow DreamWorks movie. DreamWorks very much has a split personalities in terms of what they make. Because you already get stuff like How to Train Your Dragon and Kung Fu Panda, where you can tell where like a lot of passion and effort's been put into them. And then you get stuff like Boss Baby, which was just probably generated in like a few months and just plopped out there because, oh, I guess it could sell because Alec Baldwin being a baby. I mean, we've seen that before. It can work again, right? This film just doesn't work for me. Just very middle of the road. I didn't really care for this movie, to be honest with you. I haven't seen it since theaters. When me and my friends made fun of it, I have no real reason to watch it, and I don't plan on rewatching it when the sequel comes out. Oh god, the sequel's coming out. This is just a very generic kids movie. It doesn't really have anything that stuck out of me other than Tobey Maguire coming out of retirement to do a voiceover. Possibly coming back for the third Spider-Man movie, but that's not about that. I didn't care for the characters. The sibling rivalry aspect we've seen in tons of different kids movies where, they're the odd couple, they constantly, try to one-up each other and try to screw each other's plans. And then all of a sudden they have to team up in the third act to fight a very generic villain that I can't even remember the name of. Lowbrow jokes, pointless side characters, just cheap animation, it's Boss Baby. What do you expect from this movie? And that's all I gotta say about it. There's not much I can say about it. It has some fine humor, it has good voice acting, it does have moments that it does work for me. I can stand to watch it, but it's not a film that I'm ever gonna go back and rewatch because I enjoyed it. Coming in at number 59 for me is gonna be Home. Home is another just very generic DreamWorks film. I can stand to watch it. It has decent enough voice acting, it has decent animation, it has some good jokes, it has a fast enough pace. It's just a very forgettable movie in my opinion. The guy who plays Sheldon in Big Bang Theory, I think his name is Jim Parsons, who voices the main character O, and Rihanna have fine enough chemistry with one another. They have a good enough partnership, but I just really couldn't care that much about the characters that much. The journey that they go on, very just typical road trip stuff, come across very different side characters. The messages they do bring, we've seen in tons of our kids movies. It just doesn't do anything that makes it stand out amongst all the other kids movies that have come out. And I've rewatched it since theaters. I don't plan on rewatching it anytime soon because it's just a very middle of the road backlog project that somehow got a theatrical release. I just can't really tell you much about it because it just doesn't stick with me. And that's why it's so low on this list. Coming in at number 58, everybody bitched about me not putting this film on my DreamWorks list before Kappa had me taking the comments off. Everyone talked about it, me not putting this list. You get what you wish for, people. Number 58, Joseph King of Dreams. Everyone was talking about, hey, you didn't include this movie in the DreamWorks list. Why did you not include Joseph King of Dreams? I watched it earlier this year during quarantine because I wanted to catch up on the DreamWorks films I missed out on, and it's extremely mediocre. This is a direct-to-video sequel that was made a couple years after Prince of Egypt, and apart from the fact that Ben Affleck voices their title character, I can't really tell you much about this movie, folks. I watched it while editing a video. It was background noise for me because I simply just didn't care. And although people might criticize me for not really, watching the film, I pay attention to enough. I do like the classic hand-drawn DreamWorks style that they used to do with their movies before they went full of CG. I think they're going back to it with the Spirit sequel that's coming out supposedly next year. We'll see what happens with that. I like that desert setting. I think it brings a lot of cool atmosphere to it. Voice acting's good, has a decent pace. It has what you want. Again, I can stand to watch it, but it's just very forgettable. I can't really tell you much about this movie from remembering it because it's just generic. And that's all I gotta say about it. It's just, if you like Prince of Egypt, this one doesn't really step on its toes, but I don't really care to watch it again. Coming in number 57 for me is gonna be the first Trolls movie. Similar to Boss Baby and Home that I've talked about earlier, this is one of those DreamWorks films that you can definitely tell that they just kind of rushed it out just to get the families, and they're like, oh, look at these pretty colors. And that's what Trolls is. I mean, good voice acting. I like Anna Kendrick. I think she always brings a smile to my face, and you know, she has that light personality. That's why she works very well in the role of Poppy in this movie. Justin Timberlake, you either get him in Friends with Benefits, and especially in The Social Network, he does really well. And then you get him in films like this where he's just, okay, I'll make a song for the soundtrack. I guess I'll be one of the characters. He's good as the, you know, the troll that really sticks out amongst all the other trolls in the society. Has very pretty colors, has good animation. It will keep your kids' attention if they're like 4 or 5 years old. It's enjoyable enough, but I mean, it's very lowbrow. It's very generic. It's very kids movie centric. It's just there to entertain kids for 2 hours, I guess, and just leave. It doesn't really stick with you that much. It doesn't really make you think. It doesn't really, like, you know, inspire any kids to, you know, really think about messages. It's just very on the nose, very, we want to market, you know, these dolls to you, and that's what it is. I can't really tell you much about it because it just doesn't stick with me. And that's what these films really depend on this list for me, is that what films really do stick with me, or what films really do bring emotions out of me. Doesn't matter if I'm a kid, doesn't matter if I'm an adult now, what films do stick with me. And Trolls and its sequel, which we'll get to in a little bit, they just don't really stick with me that much. And that's why it's at number 57. Coming in at number 56, the sequel to the movie I just talked about, and the film that might have started the demise of movie theaters as we know it, if you look back on it, Trolls World Tour. Trolls World Tour is a sequel that I was not excited for. I didn't really care that they put it on video. It's not a movie that's worth pushing a year back for, because it wouldn't have made that much money in the box office, to be completely honest with you, and it completely fits that mold. I will give it credit for being a sequel that is slightly better than my expectations, but it still very much has the same issues of the first one I just talked about. It does have good animation, it does have a really good world building. I will give it credit for being a sequel that isn't just, we're gonna do the first one again. It's very much expands upon the universe and really shows how there's so many other universes in this Trolls universe, and how, you know, Poppy's land is very much a drip in the buckets. It's a very weird, it's very weird to call this comparison, but it has a very Avengers Infinity War-esque storyline with their main character Barb, which I will say is a lot better of a villain than the one we got in the first Trolls movie, where she's going around, you know, destroying these lands, taking these strings about different genres of music, and basically stringing them up in her guitar to basically turn everyone into metalheads. Very interesting little concept, and I think they have enough fun with it. There is some funny comedy thrown in the mix. It has a fast pace, decent enough message. I found myself to think it was okay. I enjoyed it enough. Where this film really does kind of fall for me is that a lot of the side characters that we do get are just bad. You get your generic, you know, characters that kind of stand out for like one scene or whatever to sing a song, and they kind of move on to the next character. Justin Timberlake's character very much goes the Hans Frozen 2 route of that he's only there just to try to, you know, get with Poppy, and him constantly falling on his face, and that's all he does throughout the runtime. Didn't care for any of the other side characters. I thought they were just very boring. Again, the message, although it's fine, just it definitely throws it in your face, not very subtle with it. A lot of just generic family jokes you see coming from a mile away. Isn't super memorable looking back on it. It's a movie that is entertaining enough for a family. If you have kids or you're babysitting is fine. Throwing it on the background, but it's not something that will really stick with you after the credits roll. And that's why it's number 56. Coming in at number 55 for me is going to be Abominable. Another recent DreamWorks film for me that just kind of fell into the okay enough category. I didn't watch this film in theaters because it was in a very busy time in my life, and I just simply didn't have the interest to watch it. And I watched it during quarantine because that Joseph, King of Dreams were the only DreamWorks films I hadn't watched before Trolls World Tour came out, and I'm a completionist. And watching it, I had decent enough time. It has decent voice acting. I really enjoy Chloe Bennet as the main character. Good diversity in the cast. It has very beautiful imagery. You can definitely tell that DreamWorks put a lot of effort into the animation in this film. It's not like Boss Baby where they, you know, generate something digitally. It has some standout moments. It has a good message. It's, you know, it's enjoyable enough for families. It's just that the villains are very generic agency people trying to capture this Yeti. The emotions for me just didn't really, you know, hit home. The characters themselves, I don't really find themselves that interesting. It's a very, you know, by the books road trip movie. And yeah, that's basically about it. There's stuff taken from other DreamWorks films, and it's decent enough. I watched it going, okay, that's fine. But for me, it's just another film that I just don't plan on rewatching ever again, unless I'm forced to, and that's abominable for me. Coming in number 54 is going to be The Good Dinosaur. The black sheep of Pixar's film history, the film that had so many production issues and came out and was just a box office flop. A lot of people consider it to be one of the worst Pixar films, and I definitely do see why. It's not a bad movie, I would definitely say it is far from it. It's just another, you know, middle of the road, okay enough kids movie. It has good animation as always in Pixar. It has good voice acting, it has good music. It has a fast pace. I enjoyed it enough while I was watching it when I saw it in theaters, and I rewatched it for my Pixar ranking a couple years ago. But there's just so many issues with this movie. First, the biggest issue for me is that, the animation, although it's very beautiful and has these fantastic landscapes, when you have these very cartoony dinosaurs, it just sticks out like a sore thumb, and they just do not fit well. It's not like something like Toy Story. The toy designs are very much cartoony, but they're set in a real world. They fit that aesthetic. For this movie, it just does not work for me. I didn't really care for the emotions, like when Arlo's dad died. It's a very Ice Age feel to it with, you know, the journey with these animals and this kid kid. The concept alone is just not very interesting. I just talked about with Abominable, going on this road trip journey. We've seen tons of different movies like that. The emotions just don't really hit home. It just really isn't memorable for me. And I completely understand why people don't really discuss it that much, because it's just a very light story. There's just not much going on about it, and there's just not much that sticks with you after the credits roll. And that's why it's pretty low on this list. Number 53, this one also got me some flack in my Dreamers ranking when I did a couple years back. That's gonna be Rise of the Guardians. For me, I just don't really understand why people really enjoy this movie. If you do, great for you. I just didn't really attach myself to it. I didn't grow up with it. I watched it for the first time a couple Christmases ago because it was a Christmas-ish movie. And I was like, okay, let's see what happens with Jack Frost and Santa Claus. I've seen Santa Claus 3, so let's see what they do differently with this. And it was okay. I enjoyed it enough. It has decent voice acting, decent animation, some good music, some fun action scenes, neat little concept of bringing like all these different fairy tale creatures together. The thing that really brings this film up for me is Alec Baldwin as this Russian Santa Claus, and he steals the show in this. I would love to see a spin-off film of just him doing his thing, because he is just fantastic. His jokes really land, and Alec Baldwin just brought something fun to the screen, much more than he did with Boss Baby. Apart from that, Jack Frost, very generic character, didn't really care for him that much, because they try to make him like, you know, the soy boy anti-hero, instead of just, you know, being a villain, or just, he was just very weird. The character designs themselves just look very odd for me. The facial structure just looks very odd for me. It's not very memorable. The jokes sometimes hit, but sometimes they miss. The storyline, you know, fine enough, but we've seen other films like it, where it's, you gotta save the day, you gotta take up the mantle, stuff like that, and it's just a movie that hasn't really stuck with me since I watched it a couple years ago. And it's not one of those Christmas movies where I rewatch it every single year, and that's all I gotta say about it. Number 52 for me, another film that is a little bit controversial on my list, and that's gonna be The Road to El Dorado. This was another one of the very early DreamWorks films where they went 2D hand-drawn animation with it, and again, another film that I didn't grow up with. I watched it a couple years ago for the first time, and for me, it was okay. I enjoyed the journey enough. Again, generic journey where, you know, these people come in, these explorers, they lie to this civilization about who they are, and then eventually turns back on them and blows up in their faces, and then they gotta come in and save the day. I mean, I can give you a longer list of films that are like that. What does bring this film up for me, I will say the animation is beautiful. I love the look of this island. I love the look of El Dorado. It just looks beautiful. I love the waterfalls. I love the golden, you know, aesthetic it has to it. It just looks pretty. Some of the jokes I did find work. I found some of the songs catchy. I was entertained enough through it. It's just the characters are very weak in my opinion. I didn't really care for much of them. The plot structure is very by the books and very predictable for where things are going to go. It's good for what it is, but there's not much about it that just sticks with me. And that's really what is key for these films on this list, is that like how much will it stuck with me? How much will I take away from it? And for this film, it's just a fun adventure. You get some fun jokes, you get some really great animation, but it's just not a film that I really want to rewatch ever again. And that's it. Coming in number 51 for me is going to be Brave. This film really feels the least like a Pixar film out of all the other films in their catalog, even the worst films. To where like when Meredith showed up in Ralph Breaks the Internet among the other actual Disney princesses, I was like, yeah, that fits. It very much feels like a Disney animated movie. Again, I didn't necessarily grow up with it. I watched it for the first time when Toy Story 4 came out a couple years ago to catch up on all the Pixar films I missed out on, which wasn't many. I do like the story of this mother and daughter having a very damaged relationship and slowly having to, you know, come back together after she turns into this bear. It has good moments. It has good animation. I do enjoy like some guys like the little brothers who just can eat anything nonstop. I thought that was pretty funny. It's just there's a lot to it that just I didn't really stick with. I felt that the look of the film was just very dour and gray. The look of the film was just very dour and gray and just like very Game of Thrones-esque for the time period and How to Train Your Dragon-esque, and for me it just doesn't really stick with me. The emotions didn't really hark home to me. I didn't really find myself that emotionally invested in what was going on. I was entertained enough, but it's just not a film that really has stuck with me, and that's simply why this film is as low as it is on this list, because it's not a film that I want to go back to and really talk about with people about, or, you know, people discuss about the best Pixar films. It's fine enough. I enjoyed it, but it's just kind of one of those movies that just kind of goes in one ear, not the other. And that's just my opinion. Coming in number 50 for me is going to be Over the Hedge. Over the Hedge, it's another movie that I grew up with. I watched it long ago. I didn't rewatch it until I did my Dreamers ranking a couple years ago. Looking back on it, it's kind of exactly what I remember it being. It was okay. I had fun enough with the story about Bruce Willis as a raccoon, having to basically another film where he has to lie to a bunch of people about who he is to kind of use them for his own benefit to pay off his debts to this bear, and basically kind of blows up in his face, and they all have to, you know, they all break apart until they meet up together in the third act. Generic family stuff that we've seen time and time again on this list previously. What does bring this film up on this list is that I do enjoy the story about them collecting this food and all the, like, the different schemes that they have, like the possum pretending to be dead, the skunks, what they do. Steve Carell's this like crazy squirrel. There are some really standout-ish moments in this movie, and I really do enjoy the third act whenever, like, you know, the crazy lady and the extinguisher and like the house blows up. There's some really insane stuff that happens in this movie that I do enjoy. I wish we got more from the bear himself, because I just didn't really find him that memorable, because he's very, you know, prominent and scary scary in like the opening scene whenever, you know, Bruce Willis as a raccoon just kind of like messes up his hibernation wagon of food, and then he has to pay off his debts, but he doesn't really show up until the very end of the movie. Like, he has like one little scene in the second act where you gotta remind the audience, oh yeah, this character exists, but I didn't really find that memorable. Some of the jokes really do fall flat. Some of the side characters are very, you know, one-note-ish that I've talked about previously. Apart from like the turtle and a couple of other ones, it's not a very emotionally investing movie. It's very much just a movie that just tries to keep your attention for kids, and it does fine enough in that regard, but again, it's not a movie that I really hear people discussing about or that I want to rewatch or has stuck with me. It's fine enough, it's entertaining enough, but not that great. Coming in at number 49 for me is going to be Madagascar 3. Madagascar has always been kind of a weird franchise for me because although I grew up with the first two movies, it's never been a franchise I've been really emotionally attached to. And we'll get to it when we get to the first two movies, but this is a movie I didn't grow up with. I didn't watch it. And the only memory I have of this film is like getting the McDonald's toys when those were relevant. I never really had the desire to watch this film, and watching it for the first time for my Dreamers ranking long ago, it was serviceable. I enjoyed it enough, but it just doesn't really have that same magic that the first two had, or at least just not as much of it. There are some, you know, good moments with our characters. I do like the fact that this is a ending of a trilogy. It's not like these movies are just like three random, you know, stories that we see with some of these animated sequels. It does have a conclusion to this story that we've seen from the first film. The Penguins of Madagascar are the great as always. Some good character stuff. I do like the story, like the line that like, you know, he's messed up like during the circus act, and now he has to come back and, you know, do his little ring challenge again. That was kind of fun to see that character payoff. There's some fun little side characters around, but they're not super memorable in my opinion. The circus setting just really didn't, you know, draw my attention as much as the Africa setting in the second film, or, you know, Madagascar in the first movie. The look of the film just doesn't really look as good as the first two movies because those are very, you know, vibrant, distinct locations in this film. It's just very much, they're on stuck on like a circus train doing stuff. The plot's very bare bones. I felt that the jokes in this film were kind of annoying, especially from Maurice and King Julian. I never really liked those characters even from the first film. I've always felt like, why do you gotta bring this character back? Circus, the thing that Chris Rock does, I felt it was very annoying. For me, I enjoyed it enough. It has some enjoyable moments. I did enjoy when they go back to the New York Zoo in the third act. It was fine, decent enough ending to the trilogy, but it's just there, you know, it's enjoyable enough. Coming in number 48 for me is going to be Mr. Peabody and Sherman. Another film that I didn't really grow up with. I watched it for the first time for my Dreamers ranking, and it's decent enough. I enjoyed it. Had a fun enough story. I never grew up with the cartoon, so I really can't say much about how the film really does pay homage to the original source material or not. But for what it is, it's a fun little time travel story. I felt like it had a lot of craziness to it. The events of these characters go on with, you know, this boy, his dog, and then, you know, this other girl that like he really doesn't like, and them like having been the odd couple to, you know, work their way out of this situation was nice to see, but we've seen other films like it and done better, in my opinion. There's some fun little cool time travel aspects we've seen in a lot of these time travel comedies like Bill and Ted and such. Very much has that kid aesthetic to it. It has the fast pace, it has some fun moments. I enjoyed it enough. It's just, it doesn't really stick with me that much. The characters aren't super memorable. They don't really stick out that much to me. Some of the jokes do feel very lowbrow and very obvious to me. I didn't really find myself that emotionally invested. It was just more about, oh, cool, especially what's going on. It's just more about just keeping your attention, and for what it is, it's good at it, but just, again, a movie that just doesn't really suck with me, and I don't really see many people talking about it today. Coming in number 47 for me is going to be Monsters University. This is a sequel, or prequel I should say, that very much is frustrating to me because I've always wanted a Monsters Inc. sequel, and there was one developed for Circle 7 Animation back when that was relevant, before that got cancelled, and I've always been one of those people that's always wanted a Monsters Inc. sequel. I've always really loved the ending of the first one, really wanted to see these characters grow. I know there's like a Disney Plus show in the works currently that's going to be a sequel of some sort, but I've always wanted a sequel, and the fact that we didn't get that, we've gotten this instead, and it kind of bothers me for a myriad of reasons. Firstly, the story really doesn't merit itself to be, you know, worth a feature film. Prequels always have a very interesting split where they do have a reason to exist, and they do tell a story that you are interested in to see like how things are set up in this world, or how characters come to be that we see in feature films. Stuff like that is very interesting, but then you get prequels that are just there to just line up to the first movie and just are there for a cash grab, and Monsters University is only one of those movies that feels like a cash grab. I didn't really care for any of the side characters that we got in the movie. The college set that the film's going for has enough of a fun atmosphere that I do enjoy enough. Great voice acting as always. Great to see Billy Crystal and John Goodman back in their roles again as Sully and Mike. It's just, for me, just the story of this film is just very by the books, and just very much just, okay, character A has to go through a scenario, character B has to go through a scenario. Very much rinse and repeat of these college games going on. What really does bring this film up for me is the third act, whenever, you know, it's revealed that Mike wins his competition, and it's revealed that Sully just kind of like cheated his way into winning, you know, to turn like that little knob up in that little scare machine that makes it super easy to scare. And basically Mike goes into the real world to try to scare people, and just like the whole like scene of slowly Mike sneaking through his log cabin during his summer camp and the Rangers trying to go after them. That was a fantastic sequence. I would definitely say it is the reason why this film is up in this list. Like none of the films on this list below it for me had that amount of emotion, amount of tension that scene brought to it. I love that ending of the movie. Other than that, this film is just very just, okay, it's there, but it's just like, it's a story that I just didn't want to see come to life, and it just didn't really give me a reason for why it exists. It just didn't justify itself for its existence, and it just was kind of frustrating because I wanted to see where these characters were going, not to see their college days. And the fact that we still haven't gotten one just kind of, you know, angers me, and the fact that we just get this instead, I just don't see why. That's why I said number 47. Coming in number 46 for me is going to be B-Movie. You know, I am more, you know, nostalgia for the memes when this blew up back in like 2016, 2017, more than rewatching the actual movie. Because I didn't really grow up with this movie. I watched it for the first time a couple years ago, and watching it, it was okay. I enjoyed it enough. It has a fun little story about Jerry Seinfeld as this bee, and you get Renee Zellweger as a human who slowly starts to fall in love with this bee. It's a ridiculous concept, but I thought it was very funny, and how they execute it. The whole thing about bees, you know, how they stop producing honey and all of a sudden the world just goes to shit. That's kind of funny. I really do love Rob Riggle as the boyfriend of Renee Zellweger. He's a comedic genius whenever, you know, he gets his comedic timing right, and he's just great in this. One of his best roles in my opinion. It's just a lot of fun to have in this movie. It's just not that emotionally investing. It hasn't super memorable in my opinion. The side characters are very just by the books, very generic things just to serve some jokes, and that's about it. It's fun enough. It's one of those dream films where like you sit there to have fun, not necessarily to, you know, really care about what's going on. And for what it is, I enjoyed it, but just not a film that I would go back and rewatch over and over again. Number 45 for me, the film that started off DreamWorks' history in this rivalry to begin with, Ants. Ants is a weird movie. Looking back on DreamWorks' entire history, really before Shrek, they really didn't really have an identity, and this film really is the peak of just showing, okay, we'll just do what Pixar is doing, but we'll add in curse words, and we'll have Woody Allen as this ant, and have these really weird character designs. Like, for me, this film has just really stuck out to me, because, again, this is another movie that I didn't grow up with. I watched it for the first time a couple years ago, and it's a movie that, just looking back on it, is just so weird. I really don't have issues with characters cursing in kids' movies, because eventually, at some point, kids are gonna learn curse words. I mean, you're not gonna, you know, stop them from not learning that stuff. But for this movie, it just seems so weird. The voice acting, apart from Sylvester Stallone as, like, the strong ant, just, the cast just seems very weird. The designs of the ants look very ugly. I enjoyed it enough for the storyline alone. It's very interesting to watch because of the drama that happened between Pixar and DreamWorks. Has a fun third act, has some interesting bits in it. I just felt like it just doesn't really drive that well for me today. I don't know, it just feels very outdated in a lot of aspects, feels very obsolete. Walking away from it, I was just like, okay, that's a movie. I enjoyed myself with it. It's just, I don't know, it just doesn't have that charm that a lot of the DreamWorks films have. Coming in number 44 for me, slightly being above Ants, A Bug's Life. A Bug's Life has very different issues that Ants doesn't have, but both kind of round to just being decent. A Bug's Life is definitely one of the lesser Pixar films, and especially compared to like all the films that were stacked against it at the time, when you had Toy Story, and then you had Toy Story 2 immediately after, and you had Monsters Inc. and The Incredibles and Finding Nemo. There were so many great Pixar films that when you get this, and it's the follow-up to Toy Story, and you go, okay, that was decent, it just very much falls into the background, and I understand why. I didn't really care that much for the characters that much. I didn't really find themselves that investing. I do like the villains of the Moss, and that's kind of like taking clock feel to it, but again, like we talked about so many times on this list beforehand, it's about this character having to, you know, kind of con a bunch of people into doing something for him, and then it blows up in his face, and then they have to come back, and then big third act ensues. You know, it doesn't really do anything that original for it. The animation kind of looks cheap today, like it doesn't really necessarily hold that well. And versus something like the first two Toy Story films where that really doesn't bother me, this film I think because I have more issues with it as in terms of character and tone and pacing and just the writing in general, just not being as strong, for the story not being as interesting as I wanted it to be. Those kind of minute details kind of stick out more to me. After rewatching this film again, I just really don't have the passion to rewatch it anytime soon because it just didn't really stick with me that much. And that's why it's at number 44. Coming in number 43 for me is going to be Shrek Forever After. After Shrek 3 definitely did drop the ball for this franchise, Shrek 4 being a finale to the series was a good idea, and for me, although it was nowhere near as good as the first two films, is a decent enough conclusion to this series, and I don't really see any point in doing a Shrek 5. I don't even think they're doing that anymore. I think they're doing a reboot now. But it is a good conclusion to this series, and I did enjoy it enough. I didn't grow up with this movie. I watched it the first time a couple years ago. I do enjoy this like Elseworld story, like It's a Wonderful Life, where Shrek goes into a world where he didn't exist, and you see all the different, you know, characters being changed changed up, like, you know, Puss in Boots is fat now, and you have Fiona being like this, you know, badass warrior. The voice acting is good once again. I did care for these characters because, you know, I grew up with them, so seeing these characters have like a good conclusion and seeing them act differently off-script that we've seen previously was very interesting to see, and I just really enjoyed it. There are definitely issues with it. I didn't really find the main villain of the film that memorable apart from his look. I feel like the pacing definitely did kind of drag at points. I feel like the film was a little too long for its own good in my opinion. It has its predictable plot beats and cliches and, you know, throwing its messages in your face about, you know, appreciating those around you, appreciating your life. Stuff we've seen time and time again. It has its moments that has fun. I enjoyed it. Good conclusion. It's just not as good as the films above in my opinion, and that's why it's at number 43. Coming in at number 42 for me is going to be the first Madagascar film. Madagascar, I grew up with the first movie along with the sequel, and rewatching it for this list, I will say I enjoyed it, you know, enough. It's not as good as I remember it being when I was little. For me, I do like the aesthetic of the Madagascar island. I think the film looks very well done. I think the film looks very pretty. I love the aesthetic of beaches, so just having that in a movie definitely just raised the film up for me. I do like the story of this lion who's been tamed his entire life at the zoo, who gets dropped off on this island, who slowly becomes more unhinged as the film progresses and becoming, you know, more of his primal instincts start to come out. The penguins of Madagascar, we get to see them, and they are just brilliant. I really do love the penguins of Madagascar. You'll see their solo film way up on this list because they're just characters that I can never get old of. They have the right amount of screen time in all these movies to where they just fit perfectly. Their, you know, little banter they have between all four of them are great. It's enjoyable, it has good music enough, you know, I like to move. It became, you know, a trend because of this movie. King Julian and Maurice, although I'm not really a big fan of King Julian. Sacha Baron Cohen, he's a good actor when I like him and stuff, but I primarily really only liked him in Borat and Talladega Nights. He's decent enough here, it's just I really can't stand him in the sequels in these movies, and even in this film, he kind of just stretches out his presence a little bit because he's Sacha Baron Cohen. I really care that much for the side characters like, you know, Gloria or Melman, or I forgot the character, I think Marty, the Chris Rock Zeba. They just never really grabbed me that much, and they've always been characters that I'm like, okay, they're fine enough in their own little, you know, side plots, but it's just kind of like I never really grew attached to them that much. You get your predictable plot beats, you get your jokes that sometimes hit, sometimes miss. You get your enjoyable moments, you get your fun characters. It has the cliches, it has its paging issues, but overall rounds to being a decent film. Coming in number 41 for me is going to be Cars 3. The final installment is Cars trilogy apparently, and for me it's a gigantic step up from Cars 2. Not as good as the first one in my opinion, which I'll get to in a little bit in this list, but I will say it definitely is a good course correction. Goes back to its roots of the first film, is a lot more about racing than the spy shit that we got in the second movie. Has decent characters. I do like the, you know, the new character we get in, I believe her name is Dela Cruz, I believe it's the name, but her chemistry with Lightning McQueen is very well done. Has good voice acting, has really good animation. I enjoyed it as a whole, I thought it was pretty fun, but it definitely has a handful of issues that do bring it down this low in this list. My issue mainly goes from the tone pacing. I vividly remember the first teaser dropping from this movie and it just being like a, you know, just a shot of Lightning McQueen crashing on the track with no like music or anything. You just hear like scrapings of metal, and it's just like a super dark like Logan style teaser, and you go watch the movie and it's not really, and it never just gets that dark, and it just kind of seems weird looking back on it. Another issue I have with the film is mainly in Jackson Storm, our main villain. Bringing in Armie Hammer, he's a great actor. I've seen him in a lot of stuff, really loved him in The Social Network and other big movies, and you bring him in as his main villain that, you know, he's the new guy, he's like the most updated, you know, fast guy who, he's the one that makes Lightning McQueen crash, and you expect to have a really big presence in the movie, right? He only shows up in the movie for about, I would probably say 5 minutes. He only shows up in the opening to be a dick from Lightning McQueen. He, you know, reacts to what after the crash, and then he legit does not show up until the very end of the movie right before the race happens. And then after he gets beaten by Dela Cruz, he just doesn't, you don't see him for the rest of the movie, you don't even see his reaction to being beat. He's just a very stock villain, and for me, you're wasting Armie Hammer's talents just to bring in this very just generic, by-the-books guy, and he has no personality to him, he's just a dick, and it's just very wasteful because you want him to be this guy you want to overcome, but you don't even see a scene of him, like in the second act of him just reacting to Lightning McQueen trying to retrain himself like to beat Jackson Storm. He's like, ha, stupid old man. No, you don't even see any of that, he's just a throwaway villain. Another issue I do have with the film is just simply, I feel like there's some major pacing issues, as in terms of like stuff that kind of, you know, during this whole racing sequence or the training montage, I would probably say, there's just stuff that I feel like just could have been taken out. And the last thing I do have an issue with this film is that a movie that's really based upon Lightning McQueen trying to, you know, regain his strength and try to beat Jackson Storm, it doesn't really go anywhere because it kind of cops out at the very end and lets Dela Cruz win, which although I understand you want to have this passing of the torch mantle, for me, I wanted to see Lightning McQueen kick his ass, or at least beat him, and you don't don't get that in this movie, and for me, I felt it was kind of a cop-out. The only reason why it's not as bad is simply because like the main character that we do get into this movie, the new one, and I felt like she was very, you know, she had a lot of good personality. There's some good stuff with the side characters, although they didn't really get a lot of screen time, especially Mater, which is understandable. Chick Hicks has more of a presence in this movie that Jackson Storm does. Like, he has a little talk show he has, you see him throughout the movie, like Lightning McQueen watches him in this trailer and stuff, and although it's a good concept, what really kills it for me is that the fact they couldn't get Michael Keaton to voice him again, and the guy they get to voice him is so bad and just not Michael Keaton that it just distraction kind of ruins that whole idea. But other than that, decent sequel, good ending to the story. I don't want a Cars 4. I don't care whatever spin-offs they make. That's different, but decent enough ending, but just we shouldn't even gotten into Cars trilogy in the first place, in my opinion. Number 40 for me is going to be Sinbad, Legends of the Seven Seas. The very last, to this day, DreamWorks animated film that was fully 2D, and it's a decent little close to that. I think it's definitely one of the better animated 2D style DreamWorks movies. Fun little story. I've never been truly attached to the Sinbad character. This is the only Sinbad movie I've seen of him. You get your generic adventure stuff. It has really good animation to it for the time and still holds up well today. Decent voice acting, some fun characters you get around with, some good jokes. It's enjoyable. You get a fun time with it. It's just not that memorable to me and just doesn't really stick out that much looking back on it. Definitely reminiscent of the early Pirates of the Caribbean movies because that came out the same year, I believe, as Curse of the Black Pearl. And you can definitely feel that, you know, presence and that kind of like inspiration, early 2000s-esque feel to it, and just brings up some nostalgia, although I didn't grow up with this movie. It's fun, it's enjoyable, it has its flaws, but I enjoyed it, just doesn't really stick with me. Number 39 for me is actually going to be Madagascar 2. I Think Motomoto Likes You, or Madagascar 2 Escape to Africa, whatever title you prefer. The second Madagascar movie, the Empire Strikes Back of the Madagascar films, if you can call it that. It's a fun movie. I definitely will say it's one of those streaming sequels that you'll see a little bit pattern later on the list where they make sequels to movies that I think are better than the first one. They do improve upon the characters. They do expand this world. They go into a different location. So it's not just like a rinse and repeat version of the first film. You meet Alex's parents and like his backstory, and it actually brings a lot of good emotional stuff to the movie. There's a good gag with Marty and how he finds all these zebras that act exactly like him. The whole Motomoto storyline that I referenced earlier became a meme and is funny. The side characters we do get, although not as memorable as the ones in the first movie, they bring their own personality to them and they are fun. I thought this film had the best comedy, the best emotional aspects. Penguins are always great as always. It's just a lot of the stuff I talked about in the first film that kind of carries over. That's why this film is as low as it is on the list. King Julian is worse than this movie. I just never understood why he stuck around for the sequels other than Sacha Baron Cohen, and he's a recognizable name. This and the third movie, he was just not enjoyable to be around. There are definitely some pacing issues. The film definitely has its cliche beats of, you know, characters breaking up and, you know, they gotta be sad before they can, you know, rise up in the third act. It's a decent sequel, but overall these Madagascar films just really haven't really stuck with me that much. It's a decent flick, but the Madagascar trilogy as a whole is just a series of movies where I enjoy them. It's just that I don't think any of them are great. Number 38 for me, this one might give me a shot, but screw it, it's my list. Chicken Run. Chicken Run is a movie, another one I didn't grow up with. I watched it for the first time on Netflix a couple years ago, and it's a movie that I enjoy. Aardman's always been a studio that I, you know, really appreciate. I grew up with Wallace and Gromit. I grew up with Shaun the Sheep, which we'll get to Wallace and Gromit later on this list. Aardman's always been a studio that they've always done these simple stories. They've never been ambitious. They've never been Pixar level of we're gonna, you know, change your mind. We're gonna make you feel all these different emotions. We're gonna really change the game of the animation industry. They're just a fun little claymation studio that just have fun little side stories, and Chicken Run exactly falls into the category, and for what it is, it's good. Fun little story about these chickens who are trying to fly, trying to escape this hen. For what it is, I enjoyed it. I didn't really find myself that invested in the main characters. I didn't really find myself really emotionally invested. I had fun with what was going on. It had a lot of good little side gags and humor that Aardman always brings to their films. Really fun animation that always kind of adds that little charm that they always have with their movies. Fun movie, enjoyable stuff going on, and it's just another movie on this list that really hasn't stuck with me since I watched it for the first time a couple years ago. And I will be watching the sequel when it does drop on Netflix, I believe, in a couple years. It's just not a great film in my opinion. But if you do love it, hey, great for you. Number 37 for me is actually going to be Turbo. Turbo is a movie that I know some people might be mad that it's as this high as the list that it is. But for me, like, again, another movie that I didn't grow up with. I watched it the first time a couple years back. And for what it is, I enjoyed it. You know, although it's very much a knock on Pixar's Cars, I just found it to be pretty fun. I like Ryan Reynolds. This was like in an era where this is right before he became like the biggest movie star in the world now, with Deadpool and Free Guy and all these big movies like him and his Bodyguard coming out. And he's very good as this main character, this snail who wants to be a racer, but of course he's a snail so he can't really run fast. Then through reasons he gains these powers and becomes super fast. It's a good story about this guy, you know, being all the odds, being able to accomplish his dreams. I found the side characters very fun. I really liked his like interaction with the guy who runs the taco truck. It has a very fun little world that the film plays around in. Entertaining pace, entertaining enough storyline. Found myself having fun with it. Not the best villain, not the best writing in the world. has the cliches, has its downbeats. You know what to expect with this film, but for me, I enjoy it. Out of all the films below it on this list, I would rather rewatch than any of the ones below it. And that's why it's number 37. Next up, number 36 for me. This one also might get me, in a lot of trouble, but again, I have a lot of issues with this movie, and it's going to be Incredibles 2. Incredibles 2 is a movie that I've been waiting for years. I love the first Incredibles. We'll talk about it a lot more when we get to it on the list, but I do truly love that first Incredibles movie. I grew up with it. I can quote it all day. Great characters, great storyline, great pacing, great music. I love the first Incredibles to death, and the fact that it took so long for this movie to come out. We got a Finding Nemo sequel, we got a Monsters Inc. prequel, we got an entire Cars trilogy of movies before we even got a sequel to this movie. Despite the fact it ended off in a great cliffhanger with The Underminer, you waited so long for this movie, and when you get it, it's good. It has great animation as always, although I will say the designs of the characters look a little off because of a lot more detailed they are than they were in 2004. And the voice acting a little bit is off because it's kind of weird hearing these like mid-40s characters sounding like 65-year-olds. Not to disrespect any of the actors, but it's still good voice acting, has some really good humor. Brad Bird, he's a great director as always. This film proves it once again. Great score with Michael Giacchino once again, fun action, does a decent enough job at expanding this world. But for me, this film was just incredibly disappointing because I waited so long for a sequel, and Brad Bird explicitly stated that he was not going to come back until he had a story that was worth coming back for a sequel for. It's the exact same issue that I had with Jason Bourne, with Matt Damon and Paul Greengrass being like, we're not coming back to Jason Bourne unless we're going to have a great story. And then Jason Bourne came out and no one's talking about it now. And the exact same issues with this movie, because you wait 14 years, you're like, okay, if you're not going to do the Toy Story 3 style of aging up these characters and you're going to, do a Halloween 2-esque thing of setting it right after the first one, make sure that you make a sequel that's like worth having a story being told and, just really giving something that's worth chewing on, and you just get more incredible shit. It's just more superhero shenanigans for 2 hours, and for me, although it's entertaining, although it's well made, although I can say, I can understand why people enjoy this film as well as the first one, for me, who wait so long to see, okay, what are they going to do different? What are they going to do more that just expands this world, expands these characters, do something different, and especially speaking on the superhero genre, which this film had to write the gold mine because the first Incredibles came out in a time where superhero movies were just starting to get good again. We had the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films, we had the early X-Men films coming out, we had Blade, but we still had a lot of missteps in the genre, like Ben Affleck's Daredevil or Hulk with Ang Lee, a lot of these missteps, and 14 years later, the superhero genre is a lot different than it was in 2004, and you could have commented on that, but they don't. It's just more superhero shit. It feels like a direct-to-video sequel that could have been made 2 years after the first one by Circle 7 Animation. It doesn't seem like a sequel that was worth putting this much of a hold on, and I just wanted so much more from this movie because there's no emotional investment in this film. There's nothing that is going to make you really think about the movie. There's not much going to make you cry. It has the most generic Disney twist film that you've seen in any of these Disney movies in screen flavor that you see coming from a mile away. I didn't really care for the new characters either, like the woman who could do portals coming from her hands and stuff. I didn't really care for that. Vanelli on the cruise ship, didn't really care for that. It's just for me, I wanted so much more from this movie, and I really wish they could have done Toy Story 3 style and just age up these characters and really just comment on the world, do something different, and they don't. They just stick to what works, and although I can't blame them from doing that, it just isn't memorable. I don't really have the desire to rewatch this film ever since theaters, and although I may be a lot more negative on this film, it's just because I can say that it's still a really good movie. It's still a lot of great aspects to it. I will say it definitely is better than all the other films on the list below it. It's just so frustrating because I wanted so much more from this film, and we just get super shenanigans with Jack Jack for 2 hours, and it's good for what it is. It's just, if we ever get an Incredibles 3, please don't just be more superhero antics. I want something more from this franchise. Number 35 for me is going to be Spirit, Stallion of the whatever subtitle, I forgot what it's called. Spirit is a movie that I really didn't expect much from. Again, it's a movie that I didn't really grow up with, and for what it is, it actually did exceed my expectations. It's beautifully animated. Again, I like the 2D animation style that these early DreamWorks films brought. I do like the setting of the Civil War era where this horse is going through these times, a little adventure aesthetic that has to it. It's enjoyable, has a good pace, has great animation, has a good score to it, just a lot of the good pieces that do fit around to have one enjoyable whole. Has his predictable story beats, not the best side characters, stuff that I've talked about ad nauseum already. Overall, it's a good movie. If you haven't checked it out yet, I do recommend it. And the fact they are making a sequel to it, I will check it out when it does drop, I believe, next year. So yeah, good movie. Number 34 for me is going to be Flushed Away. I believe this is the last time that Aardman and DreamWorks teamed up. I don't know if they're involved in the Chuck and Run sequel, but to this day it's their last collaboration. For what it is, I actually think it's pretty good. It's a movie that I do have fond memories growing up with. I hadn't watched it in a long time, so I Over the Hedge until I rewatched it a couple years ago, and I enjoyed it. It's the story of this, I believe, mouse. I don't know, the designs are very weird, but the story of this high-end mouse who gets flushed down his toilet and finds this new city of different mouses is very interesting. Has a lot of fun side characters. I really enjoy Ian McKellen as the villain. I thought it was pretty fun. I enjoy Hugh Jackman as the main character. A lot of good voice acting in this one. Artemis animation style, although I will say it does drive a little bit less to some of the more classic ones, still looks pretty good here. I enjoy the story. It's pretty fun. I enjoy the pace. Has some good humor throughout the runtime. Good message. Overall, this is a good movie. It does have its issues. I don't really like some of the side characters, especially like the main one that causes our main character to get flushed on the toilet. I found him to be very annoying. Has its beats, has its downfalls, and stuff you expect coming for a lot of these movies. But as a whole, I think it does rise above the occasion more than any of the film below on this list. I enjoy it. Number 33 for me is going to be Monsters vs. Aliens. Again, a movie that might give me a little bit flack for being too low on this list. Another movie that I didn't really grow up with. I remember seeing ads of this film. I just never really been that interested in watching it until my ranking a couple years back. And for what it is, I enjoy it. I do enjoy the story about all these misfits having to come together and fight a bigger evil to save the world and such. Very much like a kiddie version of Suicide Squad in that regard. I enjoy the voice acting from Anna Faris to Seth Rogen as the Blob, and other characters I do think drive well in this story. Fight animation, I love the comedy in here that you see memes like the iconic scene of Anna Faris when she grows big in her wedding dress and throws the needle. The president played by, I believe, Bob Saget. He has a lot of good humor in the mix. It's a fun movie, again, has its issues, but overall I do enjoy it, I do have fun with it, and it's a good movie overall. I do kind of regret not watching this when I was little. Number 32 for me is going to be Captain Underpants, the first epic movie. Now, although I'm not a big reader, I did grow up with the Captain Underpants books. I loved the style of them because they had pictures to them, and they had a very comic book-esque feel to them. I even read the spin-offs like the Super Diaper Baby comics when I was in elementary school, so I have a lot of nostalgia to this property, and when I saw that DreamWorks was doing a live action, well not live action, but a full feature-length movie based on the property, I was very intrigued to watch it, and I did watch it 3.5 years back, and I do have fond memories of watching this in theaters with a good friend of mine because we were the only ones in the theater, and there was an older grandma and her daughter that left after the first 15 minutes, so I do have fond memories of this film, and I do have fond memories of the book series, and for what it is, it's not great. The source material was never going to be great from the beginning, and it's one of those adaptations that directly translates the page to the screen. It has that humor that you expect, not the most sophisticated one, but I do have a good balance of it where it's not just poop jokes and underpants jokes throughout the entire runtime, but it has that sense to it. I do enjoy the voice acting. I do like Ed Helms as the principal and Captain Underpants himself, that dual personality. I like the other voice acting in here. I do like the fact that it does mesh the first two books into one. They do bring in Professor Poopy Pants, and he's a lot of fun in the role, and a couple other side villains I do really enjoy. It's just a fun movie. It is what it is. It's a fun movie. It's a good time. I enjoy it. Number 31 for me is going to be one of the newcomers for me, and that's going to be The Croods: A New Age. I've always enjoyed the Croods movies. We'll get to the first one in a little bit. This was a movie that I never expected to come out, even when I did my 2020 delay video on all the movies that were going to be delayed. I did not expect the movie to come out. I remember it being canceled, now it's come back, and until they started actually putting advertising out for this movie, I thought it was just a dead project that somehow still got a release date. And honestly, despite that it took way too long for it to come out, I think it's still a pretty solid sequel. I did have a good time watching this in theaters. Again, Sonic the Incredibles 2 in Madagascar 2 is one of those sequels that directly follows the first film, so if you watch this in a Halloween 2-esque way, you're not going to miss a beat from the first film. The characters are still very well done, the voice acting is really well done from the entire cast. I do like the main characters. I do like the new characters in this, the Better Men family that get thrown into the mix, and they're a very different dynamic. They're very much like our modern society. Very clean, very efficient, and this old school caveman family, clashing against one another is pretty fun. I do like the fact that they're not necessarily villains. There's no real villain in the movie, apart from these punch monkeys that are very funny to watch, but there's no generic big bad villain they have to defeat and such. And they're a lot more three-dimensional than you expect. There's a lot of good humor thrown in the mix, although yes, there are some your typical family humor like the dad hating the boyfriend, Ryan Reynolds. It's generic and it gets really old quick, but luckily they don't really focus on that a whole lot. It has fun action, beautiful animation, fast pace, it's a fun movie, I enjoy it. Of course it has its flaws here and there, but for what it is, I enjoy it. Number 30 for me is going to be the first Croods movie. Again, similar to Trolls, this is a series where both films kind of meet the same amount of quality, but I do think the Croods films are a lot better quality than the Trolls films. In the first film, again, another movie that I did not grow up with, so I don't have the nostalgia for it. I watched it and I actually had a pretty good time with it. A pretty simple story about this caveman family that live pretty tribal. They pretty much live on their own, don't really talk to anybody else, don't really live around anybody else, and then this new guy shows them and kind of messes around with their situation, and it's pretty fun to see. The voice acting is pretty good. I really love Nicolas Cage as the dad, Emma Stone as the daughter, Ryan Reynolds as Guy, not to be confused with the Free Guy movie coming out, and more that I do enjoy them. Has a pretty fun pace, has some really good humor thrown in the mix that, is a kind of a play on our modern society if it was set in in, you know, the Stone Age. Not really a whole lot to discuss about this movie that I haven't discussed with the sequel. Has its issues, sure. This villain isn't really memorable. It has its issues, sure. The pacing can be a little, you know, slow at points. Some of the side characters can be a little just one-note joke type, like the little daughter who just doesn't speak a word, who just eats things. Again, it's not going to stick with you a whole lot, but for what it is, I enjoyed it. Number 29 for me is going to be Finding Dory, the sequel that nobody asked for, but we got anyway. Which you can say a lot about these sequels. Hello Cars 3, hello Monsters University. But for what it is, I will say it is a pretty quality sequel. It does a good job at expanding the universe past the first one and actually having a story to tell, similar to Toy Story 3 and 4, which we'll get to later on. The fact that it does have emotions and not just random gags for the entire runtime, I will admit, it does give Dory some actual story beats and expand upon her character and her backstory. There's some pretty fun side characters, like I do enjoy Ed O'Neill as this octopus that comes across Dory and they have to work together, or Ty Burrell and another dolphin character that like uses echolocation and a whale get thrown in the mix. They're pretty fun. All the side characters have their good moments here and there. Nemo and Marlin, although they don't get a lot to do in the movie, I will say they are utilized enough in the story. The animation is absolutely astonishing. Again, like the first movie still looked pretty good today. This movie looks absolutely amazing. The underwater effects are brilliant. It has a good story, has a fun little pace. It's a fun movie. It's just a movie that I didn't really have that much interest in watching, and when I watched it, it's not just super memorable in my opinion. I enjoy it for what it is. It's still pretty good. It has some pretty standout moments. It does give you emotions. I don't know, there's just something about this missing for me, and maybe just like, it just doesn't hit me as hard as a lot of other people do. But for what it is, I enjoyed it. I had a good time with it, and it's a good sequel. Number 20 for me is going to be Cars. I'm kind of shocked that it was this high on the list. It was honestly a lot lower, but the more I thought about it, the more this movie has kind of stuck with me. Yes, nostalgia does kind of cloud my view on this one, but again, it's my list. I can put whatever I want on it. Cars does make me feel a lot more than any other film on this list below it. And there's a lot more moments on this list that does really stick to me, not just because of memes, not just because of pop culture. To me personally, it does have its issues. I'm not going to argue that it's only kind of a black sheep amongst Pixar's filmography and the fact that it did not need a trilogy, but there's a lot more to this movie I think people give it credit for. It has still great animation, what you expect from Pixar. I think it has a lot of good, you know, subtle moments that, like whenever Lightning McQueen and, you know, Sally, they ride in the forest together, there's a lot of great imagery there. I actually do enjoy Mater's comedy because I think it's the right amount of it. It's not just overblown like it is in the sequel. Does it take Lightning McQueen a little bit to get likable? Yes, and it's the, you know, typical rise to the riches story. And really what does bring the film up for me is that the emotional moments do stick with me. Mainly in the third act, whenever, I forgot the character's name, but the blue Dinoco guy, he crashes on the course where Chick Hicks kind of like, you know, cheats his way into winning, which he's also a pretty fun villain, very much chews up the scenery. You know, he crashes on the course and then basically Lightning McQueen just kind of pushes him over the finish line, letting Chick Hicks win. That's stuff that really does stick with me and stuff that really does teach me lessons as a kid. And just stuff like that just makes me feel emotions and makes me want to come back to this film more than any other film on this list below it. Has the classic tunes like Life is a Highway, has a fun pace, some fun comedy. It's just a very enjoyable movie. And yes, the universe of these cars is kind of an absurd idea and has led to many conversations in my life where we've legit debated about the Cars universe and the actual legitimacy of it. Just, it gets really weird, I'll tell you that. But as a movie in and of itself, ignoring all of that, I enjoy it. It's a good movie. I enjoy the relationship that Lightning McQueen has with his townsfolk, especially Doc, and how he trains and stuff and how he learns his lessons. Just stuff like that just sticks with me in my opinion, and what makes it for me a pretty good movie. Number 27 might be another controversial pick, but it's my opinion. I did not agree with this movie once again. I appreciate the artistic value. I do enjoy the movie. I love the animation, but I gotta be honest with you, number 27 for me is gonna be The Prince of Egypt. Again, one of DreamWorks' early movies when they were doing 2D animation. I think this was their second film, I believe, after Ants, and this is a pretty good step up from Ants in my opinion. I do like the more dramatic tone it has to it since it is based on a religious story, and making that more epic and dramatic than a lot of other of these animated films on this list, making it feel more like Lawrence of Arabia in my opinion. Really good songs, really great animation. I do love the lighting in this film also, and there's just certain visual shots in this movie that just stick with me. Like whenever in the opening scene when our main character kind of messes up the construction of this pyramid being built, stuff like that just really sticks with me because of the lighting and how it's animated and how like the scale of it is just so big. The reason why it is this low on this list is simply, like, it's still a good movie, I still really enjoy it, but the reason why it is this low on the list is simply because it's not as memorable as the films above it for me. It doesn't have that emotional weight to me that some of the other films do. The character writing I don't think is as good as the films above it, and that's simply what it is. I really enjoy it. I probably will go back to it at some point. It's just a movie that for me just doesn't sit with me as much as the films above it, but it's still a pretty damn good movie, don't get me wrong. Number 26 for me is actually going to be Onward. Onward was a movie that I really wasn't anticipating that much, mainly because it's by the same guy who did Monsters University, and you know my thoughts on that film. And the trailers and the marketing really didn't excite me that much. It was like, okay, a couple of, you know, gnomes or elves or whatever they're called going on a road trip. Okay, we've seen tons of road trip family movies before. What's the difference between this one? And it really wasn't until I watched the movie at a midnight screening, and it really wasn't until I watched the film at an employee showing, because I do work in a movie theater, that I watched it in early March before COVID really got bad. And I watched the film really paying attention to it, and and I really did appreciate the film for what it was trying to do. The story about these like two elves going on a road trip to, you know, help their dad because their father passed away when they were super little, and basically when Tom Holland's character turns 16, his mom gives him the staff that basically can make his dad reappear for one day so they can like have some closure and stuff, and basically only half of him gets, you know, sense, and him and his brother Chris Pratt have to go across like, you know, towns and stuff to try to find a solution to get his dad back, at least for a few hours. And the story about that is a really good race against time story. It has a good pace to it. A lot of fun little side characters that you get with typical road trip movies. The standout being like this one lady who's like a dragon who's working at a waitress at her diner, and she eventually learns to embrace more of her monstrous traditions. Was very fun to see. I like the mom and her comedy. I thought that the cop had a lot of good comedy as well. And what really does sell the film for me is that the very ending of the film, spoilers by the way, but the film's been out for like what, 9.5 months. If you haven't seen the film, then check it out. But whenever we get to the ending, and basically whenever Tom Holland's character gives up seeing his dad, for Chris Pratt's character to watch him and give him his closure, because he was the only one who remembered him more, because I think the father died before Tom Holland's character was born. And for me, I've seen a lot more people, especially in real life, that didn't necessarily have a father figure growing up really hitting them a lot harder because of that message. And Pixar does a great job at showing these messages that you don't see in the marketing, and when you watch the film, it kind of hits you, and hits you in a way that isn't just, you know, over the head. It makes it feel organic in the story, and that's what makes this film so good in my opinion, and a great step up from Monsters University for this director. It has its issues, I will say. The characters, in my opinion, aren't as memorable as a lot of the other characters that we've seen in Pixar's history, and although like I do really enjoy the ending, it doesn't hit me as much as some of the other Pixar films above it. It does suck to the fact that the film did get cut short from a theatrical release because of COVID, but for what it is, I enjoyed it. It's a good movie. If you haven't checked it out yet, make sure to check it out. Number 25 for me is going to be Puss in Boots, a spin-off that, again, I didn't grow up with this movie, and I really wasn't expecting a whole lot from it, and honestly, I really enjoyed this one. DreamWorks, similar to another spin-off film we'll talk about later on this list, they've always done a good job with these, like getting these like really likable side characters and giving them their own story, and just make them really entertaining. I've always loved Antonio Banderas as this character ever since Shrek 2, and the fact that we get to have his own story, these own different characters like Humpty Dumpty and such. I was nervous walking into it, but I really enjoyed it. The film has a very energetic, fast pace to it that the early Shrek films really did have, and it had it so well, which we'll get to later on. The voice acting is really good, the pacing is really fun. It's just a very enjoyable, fast-paced, good movie. It's not trying to make you cry, it's not trying to make you like really rethink your life. It has a very exciting Indiana Jones-esque feel to it, and it really just pump up the film's pace and the film's tone, and I just really enjoy it. I think the film's really funny. I think the film is just super lighthearted in a lot of good ways, and it also has those little bit serious moments that does make the film have more weight to it. I really enjoy it, and the fact that we are getting a sequel supposedly by the writers of Into the Spider-Verse, hey, sign me up for that because I really enjoyed this one. Number 24 for me is going to be Wallace and Gromit: The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Despite the fact I did grow up with Shaun the Sheep and Wallace and Gromit, I never really got around to watching this movie. I don't know why. I vividly remember the advertising for this film on like DVDs and stuff, but never really got around to watching it until from my ranking a couple years back, and I really enjoyed this one. It's not meant to make it cry, it's not meant to make you rethink your life or anything like that, but for what it is, it's a fun adventure that Aardman always brings to their movies, and this is no different. It's a really good Halloween movie for if you have little kids or if you're babysitting. It oozes the holiday really well in my opinion. The film also has a lot of good atmosphere and a lot of good pacing to it, how it slowly builds up this were-rabbit creature, and more things are going out of line with Gromit trying to find what's going on. There's a lot of good pacing in this film, a lot of good, you know, build up and tension to see what happens, along with a lot of good comedy as well. The film really does have that classic Wallace and Gromit humor that you expect. The voice acting is great, the film's just really pleasant to watch, and just a lot of fun. The main reason why it is, the issues I do have with this film that does drag it down a little bit for me, is the fact that the design of the were-rabbit is complete crap. The were-rabbit itself looks like a beefy version of the little sidekick of the Little Big Planet games, and I'm just like, what the hell is that thing? And after like remembering the advertising and not seeing the were-rabbit on the posters and stuff, you're like, what's gonna be the design? And it's like, okay, just that. And again, this movie doesn't really have a lot of weight to it in terms of, you know, emotions or values, something that I can expect for these animated films. For what it's trying to go for like a very American Werewolf in London-esque feel, it does succeed in it. I really enjoy it, and I think it's a pretty good movie on top of that. Number 23 for me, another great spin-off from DreamWorks, The Penguins of Madagascar. This is just a really fun movie. Again, similar to Wallace and Gromit and Puss in Boots, not meant to make you cry, not meant to make you feel like some deep emotions or anything to awaken something that really will stick with you forever. It's a fun movie. It's a fast-paced, fun action comedy, and for what it is, I thoroughly enjoyed. The Penguins of Madagascar are not like the Minions or any of these like side characters like Mater that we talked about in Cars 2. When you get to your spin-off films, they really start to wear off what made them funny in the first place. This film was not like that. They still retained the comedy that they had in the Madagascar trilogy. They already had their TV show that I watched religiously on Nickelodeon back in like, what was it, 2009, 2010-ish? And this film just does not skip a beat with these characters. They're very fun, they're very lighthearted, they're just a blast to watch how they solve situations, how they banter with one another. The different types of side characters they do come across, like the wolf character they kind of have to team up with reluctantly. There's just a lot of fun stuff that I enjoyed. It does have its issues, and the villain's very forgettable in my opinion. The whole typical thing that we're gonna show their backstory and have them be like cute little babies. We've seen that a bajillion times before. It has the cliches, again, not super deep or anything like that. Not something, you know, that's gonna make you think of the best animated films in the past 15 years or so. But for what it is, I had a complete blast with it, and if they ever do make a sequel, I'm gonna be there day one. Number 22 for me is gonna be Kung Fu Panda 2. We're finally into the Kung Fu Panda trilogy, which really shows how quality this franchise is to me, and I just really enjoy this movie. Yes, it may be the weakest of the trilogy in my opinion, but it's a pretty damn good movie. Everything that is taken from the first one is mostly still intact here. The action is great, the animation is beautiful, a lot of great coming amongst the team, a lot of good team banter, the voice acting is great, the way they call back to the first film, especially that scene whenever Poe catches the cannonball and goes skadoosh. Stuff like that really just stick with me in my opinion. The villain that we do get, although I'm not a massive fan of him in the Peacock because we don't really get a lot of backstory from him, very memorable design and very memorable performance. Really good score, really great atmosphere, really setting up this world, really showing more about what we've seen in the first one, just expanded more. Just very, very enjoyable. There are issues, and this goes across the entire trilogy in my opinion, and I don't really know if anybody else feels like this, but whenever I watch any of these movies, these Kung Fu Panda films, they don't necessarily feel like I'm watching a movie. They feel like more like watching like specials, mainly because the pacing is so fast and because there's really a lack of subplots to these movies, to where most films have that weight to them, that have that sort of like bulk. But all three of these movies feel very streamlined. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. They don't necessarily feel like movies in my opinion, and it always feels kind of off when I watch them. On top of that, I do think it has the weakest villain in the franchise in the Peacock. I don't even remember his name because he doesn't really get a lot of screen time. I don't think that the banter in this film is as prominent as it was in the first movie. And there's a couple other small things here and there, but still, this is a pretty damn good movie, and if you haven't checked it out yet, you should. Number 21 for me is going to be the very first How to Train Your Dragon. Another franchise that we finally got to, and shows how quality it is. I really enjoy the How to Train Your Dragon movies. I never grew up with any of these movies. I don't know, I just didn't get around to watching this trilogy until the third film came out last year. And for me, I just kind of regret not watching these movies because they're all pretty good movies. This one does a great job at establishing this world, really building up these characters, really building this world, really showing his relationship between Hiccup, his buddies, and Toothless, and just showing this world about, like, you know, how at odds they are between these beasts and these people, and really showing Hiccup being this middleman, having to show this bond between one another, damaged relationships that the humans and the dragons have had for thousands of years at that point. And the relationship between Hiccup and Toothless really what makes this trilogy something special. The voice acting is really good. Jay Baruchel does a good job as Hiccup. I really like Gerard Butler as the dad, amongst many others. The action scenes are pretty fun, especially like whenever we get to the cage fights, are very exciting in a lot of aspects. Just a really fun movie, good emotions, good comedy, what you expect from a really solid DreamWorks film. My issues with this film that does bring it down for me, personally, is my least favorite of the trilogy, which is a very rarity when you think about it. There really is no villain in this film, which isn't an issue because some movies we'll talk about later on, they don't necessarily have a villain. But when this film tries to go for this big grand third act with this gigantic dragon, it doesn't really work for me, and I felt like it was just very off. I never grew too attached to the side characters, and I really can't name you most of them, to be completely honest with you. And there are a few pacing issues here and there, but for me, I still really enjoy this film, and just a really good start to a great series in my opinion. Number 20 for me is going to be Kung Fu Panda 3. This film is very neck and neck with the second film, and for pretty much the same reasons. The couple reasons why it is slightly above Kung Fu Panda 2 for me is that I do enjoy the story of this film a little bit more with Bryan Cranston as Poe's father. Listen, I love my boy Walter White, so when I get to see him in anything, it's always a plus. But really get to explore Poe's backstory about why he was abandoned, and it's kind of dynamic between his real father being Bryan Cranston and his like secret panda village, really showing how this world has been kind of established, and then showing his dad they grew up with at the dumpling shop, and really showing a message about, like, you know, it doesn't matter who you grew up with, who you consider to be your real dad, and showing just like anybody can be welcome and things. I'm really glad it doesn't go to the Guardians of the Galaxy 2 route and just like make the dad secretly evil or something like that. Sure, the whole Panda Village thing is a little contrived, but I do like how they build up to it. I do like the third act. J.K. Simmons, I think, is a more memorable villain than the Peacock was in the second film, with how he like has a little chi and he's going after all these different masters and stuff. The main reason why it is a little bit low on this list and it's not as good as the first film in my opinion is simply the team dynamic that we do get from our main characters, the Furious Five, don't really get a lot to do in this movie. All of them are Shifu, and I honestly wish we got more of them in this trilogy. I think they're kind of sidelined in the sequels because it's more about Poe's story, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I wanted more from Crane, from Monkey, and all the different characters that we come across, with Tigress and the Snake. Like, everyone kind of gets sidelined in here, and I kind of wish we got more of them. But as a whole, I thoroughly enjoyed Kung Fu Panda 3, and it is a really good conclusion to this Kung Fu Panda trilogy. Number 19 for me is going to be Inside Out. This film I do think is slightly slightly overrated, but I still really enjoy it. Pete Docter, this is the very first film on this list that we'll be talking about him. Being one of the most noteworthy Pixar directors, he's done many different films. He just directed Soul, which we'll get to later on in this list. Although this may be his weakest film in my opinion, I still really enjoy this movie. The concept of basically about these emotions in somebody's head and all these different personalities kind of clashing against one another is very entertaining to see and is very creative. Pete Docter always has a way to really like show this vibrance of animation, to really like grab a kid's attention from all the colors and stuff going on, but also grab attention of more mature viewers, so older viewers like me, who see what they're trying to go for and really appreciate what they're going for. The film has a lot of great emotional moments, especially towards the end, and the messages of this film are fantastic about really showing that not everything in life is, you know, happiness, and sometimes you need those gray areas. Sometimes you need to feel sad and angry and disgust and fearful because that's life. And stuff like that really does stick with me and really just make me appreciate the creativity of this film even more. The voice acting is great as always. The road trip aesthetic, although I will say it's a little cliche and does bring this film down a little bit, I still really enjoy. The side characters become across are very memorable, especially Bing Bong, and the heartbreaking ending to his story, but very satisfying as in terms of the writing. Just a lot of great writing, a lot of genius stuff that they throw in the mix. A lot of great visual images sticking out in your mind whenever, like, you know, Riley's mind starts to crumble around her as, you know, sadness and joy just start to cause a muck as the other emotions just try to see what they're trying to do. And there's just so much more great stuff in this movie. It's just, for me, simply my preference, it just doesn't hit me as much as some of the other films above it because I was a little bit older when I saw this film in theaters, not as young as I probably should have been. As a whole, still a great movie, still one of Pixar's best. If you haven't checked it out yet, you should. Number 18 for me is gonna be Megamind. I thoroughly enjoy this movie. The concept of this villain basically being able to win the day as a hero kind of like dies or just goes into hiding and he basically just has nothing to do is a great concept in and of itself, and just the way that Will Ferrell plays his character and how he's able to interact with all other different characters is just genius. The comedy writing in this film is just really funny, really on point, from Megamind's side character being this, like, you know, fish in his giant robot suit, to Metro Man having a lot of great lines, to Jonah Hill as the main villain in the third act. Just so many great characters that we come across. The love interest that we do get with Megamind is also really funny. Like, I really enjoy all the characters in this film a whole lot. I think that the stakes are really well done. The animation is very stylistic and very much of like a comic book film, feeling very much like DreamWorks Incredibles, but I still think it's very smart, very much plays on the superhero tropes that we expect. Very smart writing, definitely one of DreamWorks' wittiest films in my opinion. I just have a complete blast with it, and again, another film that I didn't get to grow up with, and it sucks because I really do enjoy this movie. It has its issues here and there, I will say, but as a whole, I do really enjoy it, and if you haven't checked it out yet, you should. Number 17 for me is going to be How to Train Your Dragon 3: The Hidden World. This was a movie that I didn't know really what to expect from. I liked the first two films, and I was going, okay, let's see what this conclusion of the trilogy does. And similar to Kung Fu Panda 3, similar to Cars 3, this movie really does cap up this trilogy immensely well, aging up these characters even more from the second film, and making the film feel more mature and feeling like an actual closing of the story was a great opportunity and a great idea. And I really enjoy how this film kind of like settles down and really shows how much these characters have grown since the first film. A lot of characters do get satisfying conclusions from the side characters to our main characters, and it's really heartbreaking, and it's just very satisfying. It's just a very satisfying movie. You get a lot of fantastic grand action sequences that really do fit for this ending moment. It does actually stick the landing, unlike a lot of trilogy endings. Honestly, I just really enjoyed this movie. I had a blast with it, and if you look back on my original DreamWorks ranking, I actually thought this was my favorite DreamWorks film at one point. The reason it isn't anymore, in my opinion, is just simply the second film does a lot of the same things, and I think it does it slightly better at it, in my opinion. I think the emotional bits do hit you a little bit more in the second film than they do here, but it's still very emotionally satisfying. Has a lot of great comedy in the mix. Toothless getting this love interest actually adds to a lot of good comedy. It isn't just a female Toothless. Great conclusion, and just, I really enjoyed it. Number 16 for me is going to be Poco Loco, let me tell you Poco Loco. Okay, I can't sing. Coco. Coco is just a very interesting movie because, again, it's another film that I didn't necessarily walk in with the biggest expectations because I didn't really know what the film was going to be about. Being a very culturally significant film from Pixar about this little boy who can't really play music because of his family kind of, you know, shaming it and banning it because of their lineage from some past mistake, and basically him going into the afterlife after swinging this guitar and going on a journey with this lost family member that people have forgotten about, and learning a lot of things about his family and his heritage and his love for music. The visual aesthetic of this film of the afterlife is very well done. The music is, of course, fantastic, and a lot of great tunes like you saw in the opening when I saw in Poco Loco. Just a lot of great visual imagery, a lot of just emotional stuff. I really enjoy Ernesto de la Cruz as a villain. I think he's very memorable, and the twists that we do get with him are very well done, and he's actually a villain that's done right, in my opinion. It has a lot of good messages, it has a lot of good emotions. It's just a very well done movie. Yes, does it have its issues? Of course it does. It's minute stuff at this point. Again, we're in the, like, what is it, the top 20? I mean, you know, there's very little negative to talk about with these movies, but as a whole, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's a pretty solid film. It's just simply, it just doesn't hit me as much as the other films on this list. That's simply the reason why it is this low. Great movie, haven't checked it out yet, you should. I know I keep saying it a lot, but I mean, it's true, you should. Number 15 for me is going to be How to Train Your Dragon 2. My favorite How to Train Your Dragon film at the time of this recording. I've really grown to appreciate this film ever since I watched it for the first time a couple years back. And I really do understand why some people call it the best DreamWorks film in a lot of ways. The decision to go the Toy Story 3 route and actually age up these characters, not just do yet another random adventure with these characters, was a great idea. The film has a lot of great emotional ties to it, especially the scene where like the dad dies. A lot of great stuff that could have honestly fallen on their face, but they don't because the writing is really well done. The film has a lot more mature themes, really improves upon these characters, has stakes to them. I think that's the best villain of the franchise. The score is really well done. The world building is really showing how much these dragons and humans have kind of like come to coexist with one another is really well done. It's just a series that, continuing into the third film, again, the second and third film are very close, similar to Kung Fu Panda. I do respect the fact that although these characters have aged and they are different in some aspects, that the fact that they are still the core of themselves is still really well done, and it's all due to the voice acting and the writing. It's very exciting with the action scenes, has a lot of good humor, has a lot of good dramatic moments. All things you want from a great sequel and a great animated film is here, and that's why it is at number 15. Number 14 for me. I am beyond shocked it is this high on this list. I'm not one to give new movies like this big of a jump, but this film, wow, it really blew my mind away, and it's gonna be Soul. Soul is a movie that, again, wasn't really much on my radar. I was always interested in watching this film because of Pete Docter. He's proven to be a great director from Pixar. Hell, we're not even halfway through his filmography yet with this company, which just shows how much of a creative force he is. But the marketing for this film is very weird, and looking back on it, I completely understand why, because it's a very weird concept that is hard to market for. But the fact that, you know, this film got bumped because of COVID, and eventually now it's dropped into streaming, and it's the only Pixar film, despite all of like the sequels that we've gotten, including Cars 2 and Good Dinosaur and such, that this is the one that is dropped onto a streaming service, not even given a theatrical release in the States, is so heartbreaking because I love Soul. And this is a movie that really has, even though it's only been a couple days since I've watched it, has really grown to me because of the messaging that Pixar does really well, like I talked about with Onward previously. The animation is fantastic and meets a great balance of being abstract and weird, which is definitely the weirdest Pixar film that has been made yet, in my opinion, and also the more grounded aspects of being in New York City. Like, there are scenes where like characters will be in an elevator and you can literally see every little mark and scratch on the elevator doors. You can go to the sidewalk and see every single little crack on the street. It is so detailed at this point. Like, it is such a far lead that we've seen in the past 25 years from this company. The voice acting is great. I really enjoy Jamie Foxx and Tina Fey and their chemistry as 22 and Joe Gardner. The score is fantastic and one of my favorites in any Pixar film. From the mix of jazz ambience we do get in the film, to Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, who the last people I expect to score a Pixar film because they usually do all of David Fincher stuff, is fantastic and fits the very weird tone of this film. I really just drive home the emotions of this film. And the whole message about, the meaning of life and how much, and all these things about your life and how much that you do matter and how much that you should live your life meaningfully. And all this stuff that really just drive it home for me, and because I am a mature age and I can understand all these themes, really just hit me in a way that I didn't really expect. The comments was really well done with all these cutaway gags that we get from 22, which could have easily broken up the pace, but for some reason the writing is so good that it just smooths out the entire storyline. It doesn't skip a beat in my opinion. The side characters and the side villain that we do get in the film are also acted very well. I love Terry in this movie, and he's not like the big bad villain, he's just a guy trying to go after Joe and 22 after they fall into their different bodies and such. I really enjoy the voice actress that does play her, very fun, along with the other like abstract people that are like, you know, training up these souls, and a lot of great meta comedy in the mix as well. It's just a very entertaining, very heartfelt, very emotionally valid, just a lot of stuff that really Pixar at its best really does bring, and the fact that this film did get such a staggered release sucks. But if you have not seen it, for me, it is my favorite film of the year thus far. 2020 is a very weird year, but the fact is, it's a fantastic film, one of Pixar's best in years in my opinion. No matter where you are at, you should watch it, in my opinion. Number 13 for me is to be the original Kung Fu Panda. This is such blast of a film to watch. I really enjoy this movie. This is a movie that I honestly didn't expect to be good. I vividly remember the advertising for this film came out, and especially looking back on the heels of Jack Black previously doing Shark Tale, and how much of a bad performance that was in the movie. Not due to him, it's just the writing and the character was just garbage. Seeing him doing another weird comedy action mix, and it looked like a joke, and for me it's just so much better than it was, and leads to a great trilogy of movies. The fact that similar to a lot of these great animated films on this list, that makes the balance between comedy and drama, and the fact that it has this great action aesthetic on top of that is also great as well. The choreography is on point along with the other sequels as well that I forgot to mention, but they're just so vibrant and they are so energetic, and they just keep you on the edge of your seat throughout every single scene. Is brilliant in my opinion. The scoring is great, the characters that we do get in the film are also acted very well. From Jackie Chan to Angelina Jolie to Seth Rogen, they all do very well, especially with Master Oogway and how he does his things. Like the scene whenever he dies and like his body, turns into petals and just floods to the sky. Like there's so much visual imagery in this film that just sticks out to me even to today. The score is great. I love the villain Ian McShane, who's like this former villain of Master Shifu, comes back. Our battle will be legendary. So many great lines from him. Very much fun. So many classic lines like Skadoosh and the noodles, and just so much stuff that I really enjoyed this film. Coming in number 12 for me is going to be Ratatouille. Brad Bird, despite the fact all the stuff I said about Incredibles 2, he is a fantastic director at Pixar along with Pete Docter, and this one was no exception. I really enjoyed Ratatouille. Again, such a strange concept about this rat who wants to be a chef, who infiltrates this one wannabe chef, the Linguini, and he eventually is like starts pulling his hair to move his body parts and stuff. It's a very weird concept, but it's all about the execution, and this film is executed beautifully in my opinion. The score is great. I love the French aesthetic that it has to it. Makes the film very beautiful looking. I love Remy's banter with Gusteau. All the little intense sequences of, Remy running around the kitchen trying not to be caught by our main villain of the film, who's very memorable in a lot of ways. He just chews up the scenery and it's just a lot of fun. I do have a little bit issues with the side characters of Remy's family. I do think they're a little bit annoying, but they do serve well for what they're given. I do like the love interest that we do get for Linguini being this like other ship that, is very serious about her craft. The comedy writing is on point. The dramatic side is also well done, especially with the critic in the film and how he eats the little pasta and he reminds his childhood. Just scenes like that really do stick with me and are some of the best from Pixar's catalog in my opinion. Very well done, very exciting, very funny, very heartfelt, just a great movie in general, and I really enjoyed it. And I think it's one of Pixar's best to this day. Number 11 for me is going to be WALL-E. WALL-E's always been a weird movie for me because I grew up not really liking it that much because I always thought it was really weird and stuff. But the more and more I've grown up to really appreciate this film and really showing how kind of terrifyingly how we're slowly getting to that future today. But among all that stuff going on, I really think that the emotional core of this film really has just stuck with me more and more as I've grown older to appreciate it. The animation is beautiful, especially like that first third of the film where it's literally just WALL-E and then eventually Eva in that desolate wasteland as Earth. The simplicity and the very just silent film-esque that has to it is just great. To whenever we get scenes like whenever WALL-E's sucked out of space and Eva chases after him and they play around with the fire extinguisher, the voice acting is great as always. The characters, despite that they're very simplistic, you grow to really love them, especially the little cockroach as well. The film's very fun, very fast-paced, a very fun villain in the little steering wheel that goes crazy, a fantastic message of how we really need to take care of our planet, and just so much more that I just absolutely love about this movie. At this point, I really don't have much to say about negatives at this point. It's just a great movie, and if you haven't seen it yet, then just check it out. Better Stay Out of Me Swamp at number 10. Shrek. This is the film that kind of cemented DreamWorks' identity, because before then we had a couple of really weird different movies. We had Ants and we had Prince of Egypt. They really weren't a staple household name until Shrek came out, and it really showed how much they could do just as good as Pixar can in some aspects. I think the film, of course, is classic. All the classic lines, the classic soundtrack. Mike Myers is a fantastic Aztec tile character. Eddie Murphy's really good as Donkey, and their banter is just genius, and I really love it. I really enjoy Cameron Diaz as Fiona. John Lithgow as Lord Farquaad. I love the villain. I love his scenery chewing voice that he has to him, and just his personality is just completely hilarious. It's a fun movie. It has great character build-up and a lot of great comedic timing that really just pay off in a lot of aspects. Extremely entertaining. Really having some good messages there in the mix, and just a lot of fun characters, just a lot of fun stuff going on. I love Shrek, you love Shrek. Shrek is love, Shrek is life. Number 9 for me is gonna be Shrek 2. Both these films are kind of compact in my opinion, similar to Cruise, similar to Trolls. I love Shrek 2. Everyone pretty much knows it's kind of the best of the series, one of those Empire Strikes Back scenarios where it's just so damn good. Just everything from the first one is just kind of amplified in this film. I love the character build-up. I love how they expand the world in this one where you bring in Fiona's family, and a lot of great humor between the dad and Shrek. And although they could have been very cliche, there's just something about it that just really works in my opinion. The whole aspect of Shrek and Donkey turning into a human and a horse, and showing that really inner beauty is what you really need. Not a very original message, I'll give it that, but I mean, it's really executed very well. The new characters that are brought in are also great. I love Puss in Boots, he's a classic character. The fairy godmother as villain, I love Prince Charming, is also very well done. The humor ups it up even more, and just hilarious timing from Eddie Murphy's Donkey especially. Just a lot of great moments, a lot of great scenes, just so much that I just love in this film, and overall, just is a complete blast in my opinion. And if you have not seen Shrek 2, you better damn should, because it's my favorite DreamWorks film ever made. At least at the time of this recording. Coming in at number 8, and at this point I'm basically just listing my favorite Pixar films at this point, But coming in number 8 for me is going to be Toy Story 4. If you told me last year or the year before that Toy Story 4, out of all things, would be one of my favorite films of the year and would be one of my favorite Pixar films going forward, I would just lock you up in mental institutions because I thought you'd be crazy. Because I was absolutely dreading this film. I was not looking forward to it whatsoever. I thought it would be a pointless existence. It was just a cheap cash grab in an era where Pixar was just doing sequel after sequel after sequel. It really hasn't been until this year that they've consistently done original movies. Before then, we just got a Cars 3, Toy Story 3, Finding Dory, Monsters University, Incredibles 2. There's just so many sequels being produced that I thought, okay, this should be another guaranteed billion-dollar hit that they're not going to put any effort into. The trailers really didn't excite me because it was just Woody and Buzz and nameless other characters just running around a carnival. And I was just like, okay, is this just going to be random excuses for more money? And I was just not looking forward to this film because Toy Story 3, we'll get to it later on, was such a fantastic conclusion that I was like, they're going to screw it up, they're going to screw it up, they're going to screw it up. And I watched the film in a little double feature with a Child's Play remake, which I thought was really funny and ironic. And I watched in this film after the bad taste that I got was the Child's Play remake, not really knowing what to expect. Because I heard great things from critics, but again, Pixar really does kind of get like a free pass from a lot of these critics in my opinion. So I walked in going, okay, just be a good movie and I'll probably walk away satisfied. And I ended up loving Toy Story 4. I thought it was another great conclusion to the series and really showing that it's more about Woody's conclusion arc and more than just Andy's conclusion arc. It really shows Woody being a more developed character he's ever been, testing his morale and his motivations for trying to love a kid and realizing that he can honestly take care of himself because he's been taking care of a kid for like 20 years at this point, and just showing that like he can move on to different stages of life. Bringing back Bo Peep was a great idea. I think she's been better than she ever was in the previous Toy Story films. I thought that Buzz had a lot of good humor in the mix. I thought the new characters also, which could have easily just been dead jokes and just could have not been good, are all great in my opinion. I love Key and Peele as Ducky and Bunny. Keanu Reeves is great as the Duke and Boom character, and just so many other characters I do really enjoy, including the almost villain that we do get in the dolls that end up turning good at the end. It's just a really good message, and the fact that the film really just ends you on such a good note with Woody and Buzz just separating each other in a good way because they're moving on to different stages of life, and seeing just having their conclusions for these characters I've grown up with for years made me cry almost in the theater. Even more so than when Tony Stark died in Endgame. That's how much these characters meant to me, and just the fact they just send these off in a great conclusion with a director that didn't even do the first 3 films, a cast that is mostly full of new people, and the fact they hit home so many of these emotions that just drive it to being a fantastic sequel. It may be my least favorite of the Toy Story films, but at this point it's basically just like picking your favorite kids. Just everything about this film is really, for me, fantastic. Even the whole thing about Bonnie ignoring Woody, which a lot of people have an issue with that because of the Toy Story 3 ending, which I would have an issue with unless the fact that you have to realize that that's how kids act. For me, I love Legos, and I had a big obsession with them when I was a kid, and then there's been spots throughout my life, like in freshman year, even this summer, where I would just buy like 5 Lego sets in a row and just build them and then just not play with them ever again. You know, there's just stuff like that in your life that you have to realize that like that's based on human behavior. I don't necessarily have an issue with that. But great characters, great writing, hilarious comedy, fantastic drama that almost makes me brought to tears in my opinion. Just a fantastic ending to this series, and I absolutely loved it. The only thing that does drag it down for me is that they do underutilize a lot of the classic side characters that we've grown to know and love. Even the ones from Toy Story 3 don't even get a lot to do. And they're really only relegated to one little sequence where they had to stop this RV at the carousel so they can say goodbye. Other than that, they're really much underutilized. And apart from Mr. Potato Head, which I understand because the actor passed away a couple of years ago, it just kind of sucks for the final film of this franchise where they can like get like a little extra in this film. Even Woody and Buzz don't really get a lot to do in this one in terms of being on screen at the same time. But overall for me, Toy Story 4 is a great conclusion to Woody's story. And if you're nervous about it ruining the ending of Toy Story 3, trust me, it's a lot better than you would expect. Number 7 for me is going to be Finding Nemo. Finding Nemo is a fantastic film. Really revolutionary for the time with how Pixar really just kind of upped their animation scale, with how they were able to animate underwater. Still is beautiful to today in my opinion. The story about how this father loses his son and how he realizes that he doesn't have to be so overbearing over him is a great message. All the side characters are all absolutely fun. I love Dory in this one. I love the little sea turtles that we get to see in the film. To the sequels, to all the little fish in the dentist's office. All of them are just great. I love the villains in the film, especially like that little girl with the braces on her teeth. Great comedy bits right there. Good tension, good emotional stuff. Beautifully animated, great score. Everything about this film is fantastic. I love Albert Brooks as Marlin. Really enjoy everything else about the film, from the dialogue to the writing to the directing. Flawless film in my opinion, and it's just a fantastic movie. And that's Finding Nemo. Number 6 for me is going to be Up. Another fantastic Pete Docter film. It's just, I love this movie. Easily one of the best nostalgic movies in my opinion, as in terms of these Pixar films. I love Up. A great story about this old man he wants to accomplish his wife's dream about going to South Africa, and how basically he decides to, get balloons and attach them to his house. He goes on this ride along with the other side characters we do get in Kevin and Doug, which could have easily been like Dead Note like side characters that could have just been very annoying. They just have the perfect amount of comedy to them where they have emotional bits and they also have really funny scenes in the film as well. The score is fantastic. I love Michael Giacchino's score. His second best in my opinion to The Incredibles, because it can make you feel so sad, especially in the first 10 minutes. And then whenever we get to the point wherever he chases after our main villain in the film, who is fantastic as well, who is basically like an old hero of his, which you used to watch when he was super little, and his like dog army. Whenever he like lifts that house and the score kind of kicks in, it's just one of my favorite moments of any film in my opinion, not just animated. The emotions hit home, the comedy is just on point throughout the entire runtime. I love the story, I love the characters, I love the pace, I love how it just makes it feel so well done, and just the creativity of the idea, and just everything about this film is fantastic. And honestly, I'm not one of those people who just thinks the first 10 minutes is great and everything else sucks, which it seems like a lot of people say that, and it's just a great movie and I love it so much. Okay, now we're in the top 5, and coming in at number 5 for me is going to be Toy Story 2. Very interesting history behind the sequel and how it was really just going to be a direct-to-video sequel, and in the last minute the creators came behind and decided to really up the ante on the sequel, and they just did such a great job with it. I have a complete blast with Toy Story 2. Does a great job at expanding the world from the first one. Just a great story about how these characters were able to go outside of Andy's house to try to track down Woody after he's stolen by Al from Al's Toy Barn. Great villain in my opinion, along with Stinky Pete. You get Jesse, you get Bullseye, great characters. All the comedy bits we do get whenever we get like we're in a toy store and you see all the Barbies. Al's commercial, whenever Rex is like playing the Buzz Lightyear video game in the opening sequence, Zurg has a lot of great moments in the film. The other Buzz Lightyear that we do get in the film, just so many great characters, so many great comedic moments, so many great comedic timing, great messages, some really good dramatic moments and good messages taught. Great tension, especially in that like final act when we go to the airport. Just so many fantastic things about Toy Story 2. And this movie's really been one that I've grown to appreciate, because when I was little, I didn't necessarily like this one as much as Toy Story 1 or 3. And although that technically still kind of remains true on this list, I've grown to really love this film. It's a blast, comedic genius writing, great dramatic moments, great character building as well, just a great movie in general, and I love it. Someone got busy! At number 4, The Incredibles. I love The Incredibles. I love The Incredibles. It is a fantastic superhero movie, one of my favorites of the genre in any capacity. I don't care what you throw at me. Just such a smart, witty, great movie from Brad Bird. And that's why it really does suck that The Incredibles 2 wasn't as great as this one, because apart from the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films and the early X-Men films, most of the comic films we had coming out at the time were just pretty bad, it's pretty standard, and we were still stinking around from the Batman and Robin days. There was no MCU, there was no DCEU, there was nothing like that. And this film really just kind of makes fun of the superhero genre in such a fun way, and really did kind of bring the superhero genre back to life. I would honestly give it credit for that. The characters are great, the voice I think is all fantastic. The story about these like superheroes that are kind of banned from society and they all have to, start living normal lives again. And all of a sudden, because of certain events, Mr. Incredible, he's kind of, starting to, lose his way and wants more of his life. And Mr. Incredible, our main character, kind of like starts to want more of his life, and, he starts trying to save anybody whenever he can, and that leads to the events of this film. And it's just a fantastic movie. It's incredibly entertaining. The dialogue is all just extremely well done. The dialogue is so witty. So many lines can be thrown at you throughout the entire movie. Any single scene you can like put any sort of quote on a poster and people recognize it from The Incredibles. The comedy is great. The dramatic family moments also do handle well and has a great message about that as well. Syndrome, fantastic villain, one of my favorite villains in any film. So witty, great backstory. Yes, it is a little pathetic, but I mean that's kind of the joke of it. And he just chooses to up so well done. Michael Giacchino's score is just fantastic and just makes you amplify for every single action scene that's about to take place. Michael Giacchino's score is fantastic and really just amplifies the film in spades in my opinion. It's fun, it's witty, it's fast paced, it's incredible, no pun intended. It is a blast of a superhero film and still one of the best superhero films of today in my opinion. Number 3 for me, fittingly, is going to be Toy Story 3. Toy Story 3 is a movie that a lot of people were not expecting to be as good as it was when it came out. A sequel that took 10 plus years to come out, especially after it got scrapped at Circle 7 Animation for being a completely different film. And this one does a great job that How to Train Your Dragon 2, I talked about that earlier, about aging up these characters, really making more mature themes that for the kids who grew up with the first 2 films can walk in going and really understand what's going on with them, and that's why it's still still is very emotionally relevant today. The side characters we do get in the film, from our main villain Lotso, who's honestly one of the best villains in my opinion of any Pixar film. From all different side characters we do get in this daycare center, the film has great tension. I do like the darker atmosphere it does have to it in my opinion, and having a lot more tension filmed. The great emotional scenes, remember the toys will be in the incinerator to the very end of the film, which of course is going to bring a tear to your eye. The voice acting is great, the comedy writing is also very on point in my opinion. The score is great. Everything about this film just amplifies it from the second film in my opinion, and just a great ending to Andy's story. And honestly, if this was the final film of the Toy Story series we've never got a Toy Story 4, this still is a fantastic conclusion to the series, which very rarely these animated series get to do. Which very rarely do animated series like these get a great conclusion. And it's a movie that's just great all around. It's not just because it has a really tear-jerking ending. The entire film is really well done, from the pacing to the direction to the story, from how it's just able to wove in these great themes. It's just very well done. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's a fantastic sequel. 2319! Number 2, Monsters Inc. Monsters Inc., the very first film from Pete Docter's filmography, is my favorite of his to this day. I absolutely adore Monsters Inc. It is a brilliant film in my opinion, really showing how Pete Docter really is able to amplify his ideas and his themes, woven in these fantastic, creative, unique worlds with these great characters from Mike and Sully, performed greatly by Billy Crystal and John Goodman respectively. You get the fantastic villains in Steve Waternoose and Randall, both very different sides of the coin, who try to, use this scare tactic who like to scare kids and like to use it for, their own purpose. The comedy writing is on point, it's just fantastic throughout the entire runtime. The aspect of them just running around these different worlds, the creativity, I love the aesthetic of seeing Boo and Sully and Mike traveling around all these different doors. It's still one of my favorite things in any film whenever they're traveling down all the different doorways. Love that sequence. The creativity is great, the color vibrance is fantastic. The little side guys, whenever you get those little two workers who have the high-pitched voices, or the librarian, Mike Wazowski. Just stuff like that just works for me in my opinion, in spades. The score is great as always, the classic theme you know it from. Even the little romantic subplot with Mike and his girlfriend, which could have easily just dragged this film down like most other films with this kind of romantic subplot, just works well in the story as well. It's great, it's funny, it's heartfelt in a lot of ways, how Boo interacts into their lives with Mike and Sully, and just how it ends up. One of my favorite endings in any film, whenever Mike opens up the door and he's like, oh my god, Boo. It's a great film. It stuck with me whenever I was little to today, and I absolutely love it. And there's not much that can be said that hasn't already been said about this movie. It's great. But coming in at number 1, the film that really did start this entire list, one of the biggest leaps in animation to this day, and my personal favorite of this entire list, easily one of my favorite films of all time, to start off one of the best franchises of all time, the very original Toy Story. I cannot tell you how much I absolutely love this film. It may be a little cliche to put the very first Toy Story on the top of this list, but I'm sorry. There's no other film on this list that I love more than Toy Story. Yes, you can throw the criticism at it that the animation is a little dated from the human side of things, but I don't really have an issue with that because the humans aren't really the focus of the film, and they don't really take away from it in my opinion. I love this simple story about this toy, Woody, who gets a spotlight taken from him by Buzz Lightyear, and their chemistry on point. Tom Hanks and Tim Allen are absolutely show stealers in this film that really do define their careers in my opinion. So many classic lines and banter of them having to be this odd couple trying to find their way back to Andy's home after they get lost. All the classic side characters are all fantastic, from Rex to Ham to Slinky Dog to Bo Peep. They're all utilized very well in the film, and they all have their great comedic timing. The score is great by Randy Newman, as it is in all these movies. Our main villain is Sid is fantastic, and his conclusion is just hilariously great. The emotion of this film makes you feel like whenever Woody and Buzz break up, really makes you feel heartfelt. And whenever they shoot up into the sky in that gigantic rocket to make it back to Andy's mom's minivan, just makes you feel just so much emotion, and just really shows how great the writing is and how much it is a lightning in a bottle situation this film really is. It could have been bad, it could have just been such a joke like it originally was supposed to be, and just the fact that it's so heartfelt, so funny, so dramatic, just so much on this film that it's just perfect in my opinion. I can watch this film endlessly any day of the week, any year. Give me this film along with any of the other sequels. It is a fantastic film. And honestly, if it wasn't for this film, I would argue not only would the sequels not exist, but I'd probably say the vast majority of the films on this list would not exist if it wasn't for the original Toy Story, and you gotta give it that. And with that, we've come to the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed this ranking, and if you did, if you haven't already, please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more content. I'm CB Emma Productions, and so long, partner.